Hey guys, it's Angelo, and today we'll be having a deeper talk about the Shadow Priest on the Shadowlands Alpha. As most of you know by now, currently the Shadow Priest seems as if it will be underperforming, as it is facing a lot of fundamental challenges to the playstyle, and in this video I want to address them in detail and discuss them with you. Over the years, I've seen the Shadow Priest grow into a very neatly designed spec in and of itself, but with the removal of powerful tools like Azurite essences, traits, and many other aspects which will not be returning in Shadowlands, we must go into detail and discuss what this means for the spec in the future. Keep in mind that this is still the alpha, so everything you see is subject to change. Now, if you would like to have a detailed first look at the Shadow Priest on the Shadowlands Alpha, be sure to check out that video, which should pop up on the top right corner of your screen now. In this video, I'm going into more detail, so I won't be explaining the abilities too much, but rather will be assuming you are interested in my views and objective aspects around the Shadow Priest as a spec. If you want to follow the discussions with all things related to the Priest or World of Warcraft in general, be sure to join our Discord server with the link in the description box below. Good, now that being said, and without any further ado, let's go right ahead and have a look. So, in order to understand what makes the spec feel very weak currently in Shadowlands, we have to look back at what has changed in comparison to Battle for Azeroth, and there are two key changes here. First, Azurite traits are gone. Although unfortunate, traits like Whispers of the Damned or Spiteful Apparitions, even though a clear DPS loss, are not really changing our rotation too much by themselves, if at all. Spiteful Apparition was a simple damage buff to our shadowy apparitions, whilst Whispers of the Damned was able to increase our Void Form uptime by about 2 to 3 Void Form stacks, but would only truly add higher levels of critical strike, so I wouldn't really consider it a game changer in and of itself. Chorus of Insanity, on the other hand, is a big deal in Battle for Azeroth currently. In fact, it is such a big deal that our entire spec revolves around the idea of achieving high levels of critical strike while in Void Form, in order to then transfer them into the remaining fight duration, be it in or out of Void Form. Without Chorus of Insanity, the entire playstyle would never feel fluent because we're reliant on high levels of critical strike to make use of Whispers of the Damned, or our Auspicious Spirits talent, which contribute to long Void Form uptimes along with talents like Lingering Insanity or high levels of haste. Now, let's think back to Legion for just a bit. With the implementation of the artifact weapon, the Shadow Priest was reworked entirely, transforming into a completely new spec, but very reliant upon the artifact weapon to work. Think back to artifact traits like Mass Hysteria, which increased our dot damage by 2%, stacking up with each stack of Void Form. Unleash the Shadows, which gave our Vampiric Touch critical strikes a 15% chance to create a shadowy apparition, or even Void Torrent, the core ability of the spec, which did the same it does currently, but baseline. The spec was highly reliant upon its artifact weapon, more so perhaps than any other spec in the game. At the start of Battle for Azeroth, we faced a similar problem like we will seemingly do at the start of Shadowlands, and that is the removal of the said core but external factors. If you think back, the Shadow Priest did terribly low amounts of damage in Uldir, as some very important Azurite traits, like Chorus of Insanity, were not yet implemented in the game, and would not come into play until patch 8.1, and it was then when the Shadow Priest actually started to deal some real damage. Okay, let's go back to Shadowlands though. When removing these external factors, which we are so reliant upon, we will once more face the problem of the playstyle not playing itself fluently. Rotation problems due to lacking stats, and lacking damage due to lacking stats as well. All in all, I feel that with the removal of some Azurite traits, and not making them baseline in some fashion, we will be struggling in early Shadowlands, just as we did in early Battle for Azeroth. Next up, let's take a look at our rotation in Shadowlands though, because here we see some flaws as well. The first, and arguably the greatest issue within our rotation in Shadowlands, comes in form of Void Bolt. I've touched on this in my Shadow Priest first look video, be sure to check that out if you'd like, the link should pop up again on the top right corner of your screen now. For those of you who don't know yet, Void Bolt at rank 2 will be castable while channeling Mind Flay. This means that ideally, in order to deal the maximum amount of damage possible, you would want to cast Mind Flay and then simply weave Void Bolt into the cast, which won't interrupt your Mind Flay. In reality though, this is not really possible and is actually quite punishing in various ways. Firstly, as discussed in my previous Shadow Priest video, Void Bolt can't be used as a movement filler anymore, meaning if you want to deal the maximum amount of damage, it must be cast during the Mind Flay channel, completely killing your ability to move. Once you do move in order to stutter step with Void Bolt, the mechanic of casting it during Mind Flay becomes completely redundant, and odds are in favor of using Void Bolt as a movement filler most of the time. Especially when looking at important in-game scenarios like dungeons or Torghast, there is no way that you can make use of the Void Bolt passive frequently. In fact, quite the opposite is the case. There's a lot of moving involved, and this ties in directly with the next rotational problem here, and that is the complete movement restriction, which is now the place if you want to maximize your damage. With Mind Flay gaining importance in our damage priority as it ideally won't be clipped short anymore, it will ideally be paired with Void Bolt. This means that you'll be essentially forced to stand still for the entire fight, as moving, and therefore clipping Mind Flay or cancelling any other spell, will throw you out of your rotation entirely. Even worse, Void Bolt was our only real movement filler without actually losing DPS, and Void Bolt will now be cast while standing still, ideally. And these two issues are not the only ones tied to the Void Bolt changes. The final one is the issue with Mind Flay clipping itself. As both Void Bolt and Mind Flay are on the global cooldown, this means that the earliest you will be able to cast Void Bolt while channeling Mind Flay is during its halfway point right after the global cooldown is back up. That is, of course, if you are using Shadow Word of Void. With Void Bolt having a cooldown though, and you having to fill with Mind Blast and Shadow Word Death whenever it is indeed on cooldown, this means that your Void Bolt won't always be ready at this exact halfway point within the channel, but instead will be ready right before your last Mind Flay clip ends. Once more, all of this only makes the rotation feel incredibly clunky, and personally I feel as if these issues need to be addressed or rather looked at again and perhaps fixed. Finally, we have an issue with Mind Blast. Now, even though this is a minor issue in and of itself, it will feel like a major issue to many. Mind Blast's cooldown in Shadowlands at rank 2 has been bumped up to 8 seconds rather than its current 7.5 seconds. This is an important change because after casting a total of 5 global cooldowns on the alpha, this means that you will have a downtime of about half a second. Add this up and you will be experiencing a lot of downtime very quickly. And since we're casters, this isn't really the typical melee downtime where you will just auto attack and white hit, and it doesn't feel like it either. This is a very clunky downtime in which you will be forced to wait to actually cast again, being able to do nothing in that downtime. This will also force the Shadow Priest to play with Shadow Word Void again, because it allows the problem to be slightly circumvented, as we will have 2 charges of Mind Blast. For the entirety of BFA, Shadow Word Void was mandatory to use in PvE content, and it seems as if this will be the case again in Shadowlands. This is kind of unfortunate, as it takes away the entire talent row diversity. Now, this could be fixed by simply making Shadow Word Void's effect of 2 Mind Blast charges baseline. Good, let's take a look at some talent issues currently. We have 2 issues here, one being Surrender to Madness, and the other one being Death and Madness. Surrender to Madness plays ridiculously weird for multiple reasons, but let's explain the reworked Surrender to Madness really quick. You instantly gain 100 Insanity, and you will cast Void Eruption on your target, immediately putting you into Void form. Now for the next 25 seconds, all Insanity generating abilities generate 100% more Insanity, and you can cast while you're moving. If the target does not die within 25 seconds, or rather that 25-second window of Surrender to Madness, you die instead. So far so good, but here's the big flaw. If the target does die, you immediately lose the Surrender to Madness buff and effect. This can happen within 10 seconds, this can happen right at 25 seconds, or this can happen after 2 seconds. Once your afflicted target dies, the buff gets cancelled on you. This plays incredibly weird because for optimal usage of the talent, this would require you to perfectly time your kill for about 24 to 25 seconds, which, let's be honest, is nearly impossible. Not doing this though will reduce the talent's effectiveness, even more so because of its second issue, which is the 2-minute cooldown. If the target dies, the cooldown is not reset, which then makes you stuck at having to re-enter the upcoming Void forms at 90 insanity rather than the typical 60 with Legacy of the Void for the next 2 minutes. This plays incredibly clunky and unfortunately makes the talent almost useless. Death and Madness is the next talent we'll discuss, and Death and Madness could be a pretty neat talent, but it just doesn't play well. Death and Madness grants you 40 insanity over 4 seconds if a target you hit with Shadow Word Death dies within 6 seconds after being hit. The cooldown of Shadow Word Death is then immediately reset, and you can essentially continue this cycle forever, as long as your target dies within that time frame. For small trash mobs which die very quickly, this is pretty cool, as you will generate a lot of insanity constantly. For anything that doesn't die too quickly however, the talent feels very out of place, as Shadow Word Death is not high on our priority list at the moment due to dealing very little damage, but we will want to use the spell on cooldown either way because it actually generates 15 insanity, meaning we don't really want to be playing around this execute idea with it in Shadowlands. Good. Now, I won't talk about the effects of the Covenant abilities for the Shadow Priest here in detail, as I feel as if those are subject to change greatly before Shadowlands, therefore discussing them in this video would not be a good idea. Once we're closer to release, I'll be sure to discuss them in more detail. All in all, I think the Shadow Priest still requires a lot of work. The direction which the developers wish to take seems pretty interesting, but the ideas need to be extended upon. Hopefully, this will happen without granting us external powers again, which will be gone after the expansion, because that will be more of a band-aid fix rather than a solid, structured fix which will last longer than just one expansion. I do worry that many players will consider rolling away from their Shadow Priest in order to play a spec which runs less risk of being uncompetitive. And honestly, I wouldn't blame them. Currently it's not looking too good for the Shadow Priest, I won't lie to you, but I think with some work and hopefully more feedback from the community resonating with the developers, this is nothing that cannot be fixed. What do you think? Be sure to let me know in the comments below, and be sure to like this video if you were able to gain some interesting insights. If you want to remain updated on the content of this channel, feel free of course to subscribe. As always, a special thanks to my supporters over at Patreon, and thank you very much everyone for watching. Now, have a good one my friends, enjoy patch 8.3, and I will see you all in the next one.